Dr. Wiedenfeld here to talk about new waves in young cinemas, especially between 1958 and 1967. So first I'm going to talk about this context. Why the 1960s, 58, 60? What was special about that time that we have this really key moment in film history happen? Then I'll focus on France, where it starts or where it gets its name, and then I'll talk about some other other new ways outside of France, and just this metaphor of ripple effects for if France is the start, then the waves are going out, and as it hits in these other locations, like waves hitting an island, there will be a reverberation, and new waves will come back from these other locales. Well, this is a beautiful metaphor that Dudley Andrew, who writes about French cinema, talks about it. Okay, so why 1960s and the start of the 1960s? Okay, there's an economic boom that's happening everywhere in North America and Europe and kind of the first world. And what this means for movies is that there's a lot of credit. There's new producers that are coming onto the scene that are like, hey, I want to invest in movies. I want to try to see if I can produce a movie. So outsiders, independents are important, and the reason that they are willing to make this investment is because there's a lot of consumer cash out there too. The general population is more flush with cash than they have been, and they have a lot of free time. Things are going well. Why does that happen at this time? Well, let's take it back to the post-war lecture. We're reconstructing in Europe after the war. Rubble to start out with, but then it's by the end of the 50s we have an economic boom. So this is the fruits of the Marshall Plan that got things started. Okay, another reason is the baby boom. There, in the 40s and especially after the war, people are getting busy and making babies, and that means that if 1945 is when everybody came back from the war and you had a baby then, well, they're going to be 15ish in 1960. So that means there's a lot of teenagers out there, and they are this audience, a new audience, and they're a different audience because they're going to school longer. And part of that was because of the boom. There aren't enough jobs for everyone, so to slow the entry, they're gonna, everybody has to finish high school now, and university is going to be next to free as long as you're, you might have to stay at home, but a lot of more people are going to be going to university, and so they're going to be studying art and literature, and they're going to be more interested in different kinds of movies. Another thing, related to the baby boom here is that there's youth culture. There's all kinds of fashion and movements in the art, rock and roll most famously, that this big new young generation is latching on to. This is in Italy, and politically, there's also going to be social movements that are tied into this younger generation. So I think I mentioned, decolonization. So there's going to be anti-colonial movements in France, especially. There's a war in Algeria, which had been a part of France, and now it's breaking away. It does not want to be a colony. It wants to be its own independent country. And so within France, this is this maybe the spearhead of the decolonization. So there's new ideas about political independence, new ideas about race, Desegregation in the U.S. is happening at this time, and there's new ideas about race everywhere. The new woman, women being, equality for women, and class. The importance of everyone against the kind of old establishments and old elites. All right, so that's the youth and kind of social changes that are happening along with this economic boom. For film in particular, there's a rivalry with television that picks up here. Now, it's happening later in Europe than it does in the U.S., where it's at the end of the 40s and the 50s. And remember, in the U.S., we have event cinema. We start to get widescreen and color to draw audiences out. And, exploitation cinema is focused on teens. In the 60s, interesting, it kind of aligns with this baby boom. So you have more adults, older folks who are going to be buying televisions and going to be going to the movies less. Whereas who wants to go out to the movies and get out of the house? It's the teenagers and the 20-somethings. So rather than just having these big spectacles like the Ten Commandments that are going to draw out grandma and aunts and uncles and all the babies and the kids and everything, now there's going to be a focus on and so you had those kind of family style event pictures as well as the exploitation, like low budget for teenagers. The new wave is from a business perspective, is a different way of thinking about it. Here, the event cinema is we're going to go see something that's hip, that's edgy, that's artistic, that your parents are not going to understand, like rock and roll. They're not going to get it. But you have been watching movies. You grew up maybe starting to see some TV. You're going to be interested in this new stuff. So the other, so how does this get made? Where does this new creativity come from? These are young auteurs. So you have a new wave of filmmakers a new generation of filmmakers. They're probably not teenagers, but a little bit older, who are exploring their personal vision. And this comes about from, focusing on France here, the cinephile culture. Here's the Cinematheque archives that they're seeing old movies. They're seeing a wide variety of stuff, not just what's new and marketed to them. They're reading about and writing about movies. So a lot of the new wave filmmakers wrote for Cahiers in France, as well as Positif, another key one. And there are intellectuals are interested. There's festivals where the focus is on art. And then you have film schools, especially in the Eastern Bloc countries where they're going to nationalize the film schools. And there's also in the formerly Nazi-occupied countries like France. This is where the French Film School, EDEC, is in I think, 42 or so. FAMU in Prague in 1946 on the left. The Lodz Film School in Poland, 48. And then the Hungarian National Film School as part of the Academy, National Performing Arts Academy there in Budapest on the bottom, also 1948. So people who are going to film school, they are seeing a wide variety of stuff, and they get the kind of freedom to experiment in film school in the way you wouldn't if you were just an apprentice in a studio. And then you're going to, they're going to, there's also some support for making short films through the industry. And this is a great new flux of creativity that comes about at the age from the filmmaking side. And that, the producers see like, oh, if I can, let me see if I can try out this new filmmaker, they might do something that these, young audiences are going to like more than what, the other studios are putting out with their kind of classical cinema de papa, like Papa's Kino, your parents' movies. All right, so there's just a little overview on the background on why this happens in at the beginning of the 60s and through the 60s. The French New Wave becomes they're like obviously they're influenced by the auteurism, by neorealism, by silent art cinema, by all kinds of by Hollywood movies especially, but all kinds of influences. The New Wave becomes a market, like a phenomenon within the market that promote like, oh, New Wave cinema is a thing, in the way that like grunge rock became a thing in the 90s and everybody was all of a sudden all about it, and they were all about French New Wave, called La Nouvelle Vague in French. This is one of the key inspirations for the background picture that I have of waves here. So let me mention a couple of the key films here: 400 Blows, Les 400 Coups, Truffaut. A lot of heart in this movie about a kind of young, somewhat troubled youth in Paris. Like maybe he's 14-ish. You can see the similar scenario to Los Olvidados, the Buñuel movie, but here is where it's a more romantic focus on Antoine Douanel, the main character. Okay, you can see it won best direction, best director at Cannes there in '59. Breathless, maybe the most well-known of the French New Wave. Jean-Luc Godard, his first film, huge success. Let me show you an example of it to get a feel for the kind of the young auteur aspect of it. You can see a little bit what he's doing with. He's known for montage, for having some quick editing techniques like jump cuts. But at the same time, he also, he'll alternate between that and these kind of long takes that have to do with realism. It's just creative in many different respects. So let's watch. This is from the beginning of the movie, and to set this up, here the Michel is this. He's this kind of small time criminal. He's in Marseille and he steals a car and he's driving to Paris with it. He's just kind of like a fun-loving dude, and he'll steal things from rich people, whatever. And here he's pivotal moments here. Well, it's kind of fun moments, and then something happens as he's driving.
C'est joli la campagne.
So we had voiceover.
J'aime beaucoup la France. Si vous n'aimez pas la mer, si vous n'aimez pas la montagne, si vous n'aimez pas la ville, allez vous faire foutre. Oh oh!
Breaking the fourth wall.
Des petites filles qui font de l'autostop.
Handheld camera.
Et je facture un baiser du kilomètre. La petite n'a pas l'air mal. Pas de jolies cuisses. Oui, mais l'autre. Oh, après tout, merde, elles sont trop moches. Il n'y a pas d'amour. Hé hé hé.
Playing with the sound. He imagines himself as a character in a gangster movie.
C'est beau le soleil. Les femmes au volant, c'est la lâcheté personnifiée. Pourquoi elles dépassent pas? Ah oui, merde, des travaux.
Interesting character here, Michel. definitely an ass.
Il ne faut jamais freiner. C'est comme disait le vieux père Bugatti, les voitures sont faites pour rouler, pas pour s'arrêter. Merde, la flicaille. Oh, crocodile a sauté. Piège à con.
You can see in the montage here.
Ne bouge pas ou je te brûle.
Okay, so now he's murdered a cop, and this sets up the, story wise, a certain tension that's going to hover over the whole film. Uh, it's getting into the, some of the deeper meaning of this. You see the style with the quick editing, and then the handheld, long kind of realist take, and then also it's playing with movies and reflecting on movies with breaking the fourth wall and pretending to be a character. Um, uh, as a character himself, he's charming in a way, and he's also a total turd. He's not gonna. He wants to pick up these hitchhikers to totally exploit them, and then he's like, they're too ugly. I'm gonna drop them. I mean, it's sort of funny, but then also wrong in a way. So he's definitely an anti-hero. He's not the kind of admirable lead that you would have in a classic movie of the older generation. And it's about his love story here with a character played by Gene Seberg, who's an American in Paris. So this kind of American Hollywood connection to France is definitely a part of the movie. Let me jump to, let me just talk about some other ones more briefly without clips. Alain Resnais is a good example. Resnais is an example of the left bank of the New Wave. So named because the left bank of the river of the Seine River in Paris is where the universities are. The Latin Quarter, as it was named, because that's where you studied Latin at the university. So, so named because they're more intellectual, and also, there's more kind of challenging artistic intellectuals. Not to say the other guys the right bank is dumb or anything like that. Far from it. But demanding of the viewers, more difficult for the viewers and demanding of the viewers' intellect, the kind of movies that they make. More experimental. So Hiroshima Mon Amour is it's non-linear narrative. You can tell by the title Hiroshima. This is where the first atomic bomb was dropped by the U.S. This is a super serious subject. Is that in dealing with morality? Was that right to kill all these innocent civilians? It's starting the Cold War, the nuclear fear of death that everybody's facing in this nuclear age. Was it right to even make the atomic bomb? So that's just kind of, some of the serious background that then bears upon this intimate relationship. Which is also going to be you could see it as an interracial relationship. Screenplay by a novelist, Marguerite Duras, who would later make films. And there's realism, similar mix of realism. There's subjective characters. There's the vision of the auteur. This is in many ways, if the most artsy of the films that came out right in 59 and 60. Cinema Verite is a movement in documentary that's happening at the same time. Chronicle of a Summer comes out in 1960. We'll talk about that more. I'll talk about that more when I lecture on documentary. Cléo de Saint-Cassette, also kind of left bank. Left bank can also mean the more politically radical or engaged. And what I love this movie. It's about Cleo from Five to Seven. This character, she's a singer named Cleopatra, goes by Cleo, and it movie more or less follows in real time a day in her life from 5 until 7, and it involves she gets a scary she gets a diagnosis from the doctor, and that's part of it. And she's going all the way through Paris. It's very much on location, and it's a small, mobile production. It's dealing with the looks, people looking at her, and she's looking at the city, and thinking about cinema and its relationship to the city. It's a great movie. Okay, too many just random comments here. Let me just quick, other key directors, Claude Chabrol, especially in '59, his movies won awards and were a key part of the New Wave moment. Eric Rohmer, who made movies, these kind of medium budget movies for like 40 years. He's made dozens of movies. Great filmmaker. Jacques Rivette, left and Marker, Left Bank, experimental, great filmmakers. Okay, so that's the French New Wave. Now, I want to, just quick survey new waves or new wave-like young cinemas in other countries, other areas. Movement known as kitchen sink realism in Britain. And here, it comes out of the focus on working class in the 50s, and it gets tied up in with a few new auteurs here for a brief span in the late 50s, early 60s. This kind of working class hero here from Long List of the Long Distance Runner. And Lindsay Anderson's The Sporting Life as well, another good example, which I have to mention as a sports movie scholar. Polish School, Knife in the Water, famous Polanski film. Polanski then would be very successful in Hollywood until he gets run out of the country for statutory rape of teenage girls. So before that, though, he was a very promising creative young director, among others in Poland. I think we talked about how they have this kind of film unit a style of production where rather than a big producer overseeing everything, the director gets more authority in collaborating with the key artists here. This is the kind of auteur formula. That's Poland. Here we're in the Eastern Bloc countries, which I highlighted the film schools before, are an important element in this. Czech New Wave happens a little bit later, which has to do with also the political circumstances here. There's both a thaw in the mid 50s, and then there's kind of another thaw, I think, when Brezhnev comes to power and takes over as premier after Khrushchev in '63. So closely watched trains. Maybe one of the most famous ones, Milos Forman. So Polanski, Chinatown's his most famous movie. Milos Forman made another number of films. So the one about Mozart, whose title I can't remember. Anyhow, Vera Chytilova. Important and somewhat, her and Varda, somewhat rare, as the only women directors we've talked about so far. I'll have something to say about that in a minute. Daisy's here, color, experimental. And then in Japan, we talked about the auteurs in the 50s, which is kind of ironic because the French New Wave directors, they love these 50s, Ozu and Kurosawa and whatnot. Well, Oshima represents, kind of a turn away from those from the 50s golden age and 30s golden age directors. to something more experimental. Cruel Story of Youth, and again, the studios here are interested in these young auteurs. They're new forms of creativity for business reasons of going after the young market, and for artistic reasons this is great because all of a sudden there's these amazing new kinds of movies that are getting made. Always hard in movies just because in film it's just so expensive to make. You can put a real limitation on the kinds of creativity that can make it to the screen and around screens widely. Kind of new wave cinema novo in Brazil, very important as well. Key in Latin America for new kinds of cinema. Nelson Pereira dos Santos was making films in the 50s. Black God, White Devil here, example from the 60s. And obviously from the title you can tell that that race is an issue that is being taken up here in explicitly. To just kind of briefly survey other one, Yugoslavia, always most liberal of the Eastern Bloc countries, flourishing here as well. Hungary, lots of filmmakers here. Young German film, it's really turning this new wave of criticizing especially the kind of West German regime, which is a testy thing to do during the Cold War, and they're on the liberal side, but interesting nonetheless for that political reason. And in the Soviet Union, Tarkovsky is the most famous younger director of this era. Not all of his films immediately made it to market, but became recognized as an artistic filmmaker nonetheless. So just kind of a brief overview. You can see that to have one lecture on the new wave is a bit ridiculous. This is really the key development of the second half of the 20th century. A burst of new kinds of film art that's happening on a lot of big screens, and there's getting institutional and commercial support, and defining film as an art form for ever since. If before people just saw it as entertainment or as related to the theater, it's the new wave cinema that establishes it henceforth as an art, and these are new artistic kinds of filmmaking that are out there, and that film has to be respected as a seventh art or an art in its own right.